Hey, today we're going to talk about oil markets and oil prices to be specific, and why they haven't gone up more. I finally have figured it out, so I want to share it with you. And if you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe. But let's dive straight into it. So I did a video that was, I recorded it the 23rd of April. It was released a couple of days later, where I pointed out that the oil market doesn't seem to, or the oil prices don't reflect the true situation, the gravity of the situation that is happening. The conclusion of that was more or less that the White House rhetoric has managed to keep the oil prices low. You know, that don't worry, soon this war is over, the strait will soon be open, the market will go back to normal. There's nothing to worry about here. And that had worked. The market believed them. And in case the market didn't believe them and they betted on higher oil prices, they got their finger burns a couple of times, those traders. Because the Trump administration would put out some truth social, the market would go down significantly, meaning that those who did those bets got blown out of the market. But that was a couple of weeks ago. You know, rhetoric is one thing, another thing is physical reality. And when reality means rhetoric, reality always wins, unfortunately. You know, I can argue with gravity forever that I want to fly. It doesn't change the reality, unfortunately. But I haven't seen the prices going up, so then what the heck is going on? Let's start by just putting a little bit of a foundation plate so we're all on the same page before we go into the analysis. So the number one, with the conflict breaking out, it is estimated that 13 million barrels of oil per day is not reaching markets. There are some different numbers. For example, the International Energy Agency, they say 12.8, which is very close to 13. The Economist, they say 14 million barrels are not reaching the market. But I'm going with 13 because that's what my favorite oil market researcher, Rory Johnston, is saying. So shout out to him, and let's keep that number in our mind. The second one is, by this 13 million barrels not reaching the market, that means that over 1 billion barrels of oil has not reached the market over this period. That's a lake of oil. That's not something that you can just wish away. And that impact is going to be felt. The International Energy Agency already predicts now that the oil demand for 2026 will fall with over 400,000 barrels per day. And do remember that in January and February we had a normal market. So 2 months normal, 10 months not, and this will still result in a decrease in demand compared to what they previously predicted before the conflict. That was an increase with over 700,000 barrels. So we are going to have a big impact. With that, let's go into it. So this, that the prices hasn't moved more, is a huge mystery. Even the Economist had a headline recently where they said the oil market are in la la land, and I kind of agreed with it. But I couldn't get it. You know, why hasn't the price gone up more? This is insanity. As I said, physical reality has now reached. You can only take rhetoric to a certain extent. So why hasn't it happened? And there were two huge puzzle pieces that recently came to light. The number one, and that is figures from US when it comes to export of oil. They have cranked up their export with 3.8 million barrels more compared to the same period last year. That is just insanely much. Other oil exporting countries have also increased their production. You know, Canada, Norway, Venezuela, Brazil, for example. Everybody cranked up production to 11, trying to fill that hole. But that hole is huge, so that's only part of the explanation. The other big puzzle piece is China. China has decreased its importation by 6.6 million barrels, according to The Economist. There are some other figures circling around. As always, all these figures have certain uncertainty with it, especially the one for China. And we have other, so to say, known unknowns. One of them is that, the oil producers that are constrained by the Strait of Hormuz, some of them have started trucking out oil via the land borders, for example, Iran, Iraq, maybe Kuwait as well. And that is also reaching the markets, but naturally much less than if it was on the sea. We have pipelines going into China, where it's not publicly stated how much more has that export or increased. We don't know, but all these numbers are relatively small. On themselves, they could not fill this gap. The two important pieces, I keep on repeating, but US increase, China decrease. So if we take that and we start looking into the numbers, so we had a 13 million barrels of oil shortfall. According to the International Energy Agency, we had a 2 million barrel oversupply. So now we're down to 11 million barrels. Then we had increased export from, I take all the known oil exporting countries that has been reported, 4.7 million barrels extra. And then China decrease of 6.6 million barrels per day. And if we start balancing this back on the envelope calculation, we get that the market is currently oversupplied with about 300,000 barrels. Naturally, as I said, these figures have a lot of uncertainty in them, but it gives us a good base. And one of the proof that this is actually what is happening is that what Bloomberg call ASAP oil barrels. If you want to buy oil on the market now compared to oil futures, the gap between those used to be really, really big back in April. Now it has narrowed, and they are, well, historically where they normally are. It just separates, a percentage point or something like that. And the conclusion from that is that oil is available on the market. If you want to buy oil now, you don't need to buy it for a huge premium compared to the futures market. So this is great news, no? The oil market have in some ways been able to handle the biggest supply shock through history. And I almost feel bad for doing this, but yeah, well, that is the current situation. This cannot go on for a particularly long time. And let me explain why. The first and foremost is that we're running down on inventory, and very quickly. We talked about the strategic oil reserve that has been tapped, but also other inventory has been tapped, and these are decreasing extraordinarily rapidly. So that situation cannot go on forever. Same as with the US export. There are question marks if they can keep this pace. Can they really keep increasing their export to this level, this historical level? Or was it that they tapped a lot of their inventory and sooner rather than later they will have to go back to more numbers that was before the conflict? On top of that, there is a political fear that the US maybe bans some of the export. As we know, American voters are very sensitive when it comes to the price at the pump. And one way for the US to maybe decrease that price would be to ban export of refined products. That would hit the global market tremendously hard, but would naturally save the US consumers from some of the price shock. And then we have the other, and that is China. China, as I said, have really decreased their import, or I should say their seaborne import of oil. But for how long will this continue? They are most likely also tapping their strategic reserve, but they have saved up this for a long time. How aggressively do they want to wind it down? On top of that, they had a ban of refined products, or export ban of refined products. That has now been lifted. And a lot of their refineries were on maintenance. They are now coming out of maintenance. So they will look at the market and try to buy oil. And now when they're ready to, or allowed to export it, to refine it. So they will probably approach the market in a more aggressive way going forward. And then we have another big unknown, and that is the war in Ukraine. As you know, Russia and Ukraine are locked into this war of attrition. And the higher the oil prices goes, the more or the higher the incentives is for Ukraine to do some kinetic sanctions on Russian oil export terminals and pumping stations. So that means the higher the oil price, the more likely we are to see the Ukrainians trying to stop that export, meaning the market will become even tighter going forward. So as you can see, we are at the moment at this stage in some kind of balance, but this balance is not sustainable for a long time. We will see for how long. That's my take of the situation. I thank you very much for watching if you're here until the end, and don't forget, subscribe, like. Until next time, all the best.